Yeah, so moving to 2024, we've got Everton who've
Mm.
managed to reduce their points deduction to 6, but still under investigation. And also, you've got Forest. Um, it does seem bizarre that they still haven't decided what the punishment's going to be because we're now 10 games off the end of the season, and you can guarantee, as sure as the sun comes up, well, it doesn't come up here very often, but in Australia, it comes up every morning, that both clubs will appeal. So that means that that will stretch into past the end of the season. So, you might have an asterisk. Is that asterisk going to get smaller, larger, or is it going to disappear? It is madness. But we're not here to rail against modern football. We're meant to be looking back at the glory days of Swindon. Actually, there is a strange irony to the fact that as Swindon got put down to the third tier, do you remember the club that actually got put up to the second tier in their place because they had lost the playoff final? Tranmere Rovers.
Tranmere,
Tranmere
yeah.
Rovers. So, linked into your first game and how that happened. And then, as I say, that's unique. No other team in the world or country, certainly, has ever won a playoff final and not got promoted. So that's a badge of honour, I believe, for
Yeah,
Swindon Town, and one that you can carry with you. You could turn into a song. You'll never sing that, whatever it might be.
yeah.
But I would like to just shift forward into a slightly more positive thing, which was the next playoffs you got involved in, and you've already
Yeah.
mentioned the fact that Glenn Hoddle was in charge and scored one of the goals in another great game.
It was an amazing game. And that season, I think I was in the last year of my A levels and I was predicted to get pretty good results. And then by the end of it, I just scraped through. And I'm sure it was just because I was obsessed with how Swindon were going to, get through that season. Um, I went to, all over the country following them and just an amazing season. And having Glenn Hoddle playing at sweeper meant that, we played some beautiful football, conceded a ton of goals.
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, just in the run up to that playoff final, there were three games that I'll always look back on for as long as I live, which were uh, a 6-4 win at Birmingham on Easter Monday when we were 4-1 down. And Glenn Hoddle stepped into midfield and just ran the game from 4-1 down with, I think, 20, 22, 23 minutes left and just turned it around. Amazing. It's a bit of an interesting walk back to the coach after the game,
I
but
can imagine.
Birmingham fans weren't happy. Remember my dweeby friends and I, we were sort of skinny 18-year olds trying to just strut. We thought, oh, we should have a celebratory pint before we get back on the coach. And
Mm.
going into the pub, or trying to walk into the pub nearest St Andrews, and this a policeman just stepped in front of us, and I remember him saying, "It would be hilarious, but I'd have to clean it up to let us in." So um, off we went. So there was that, and then a few weeks later, the playoff semi-finals against Tranmere Rovers. Again, Tranmere. I don't know why is my life so intrinsically linked with Tranmere Rovers. But yeah, we beat them 3-1 at home, and then going up to Prenton Park the following Tuesday or Wednesday, and I think they won 3-2 in that game. And just the last few minutes, just Swindon hanging on, hanging on, hanging on. And at the end of the game, Swindon Tranmere have a grudge against Swindon for an event earlier in the season where they were winning at the county ground and the floodlights failed. And they like to sort of mention this quite a lot, and they still cling on to the way that I still cling on about Swindon's demotion in 1990. Um, but yeah, and at the end of the game, Swindon fans went on the pitch, Tranmere fans went on the pitch, and there's a moment where you think, "Oh, this might go south," but then it was just sort of friendship and exchanging scarves, and the things that might make some people vomit in their mouths a little bit, but it was,
Mm.
just an explosion of mutual respects, and yeah, it was wild. And then a few days, or maybe 10, 12 days after that, all down to Wembley for the final against Leicester, and hiring a coach with myself, and there was a group of our friends. We filled the coach and down there. I think we were the first people there, last people out. And yeah, Swindon 3-0 up. Like you say, Glenn Hoddle scored just before half time. Absolutely beautiful goal. Just passed it in from 25 yards. And then we go 3-0 up pretty early in the second half. And yeah, I'm one of my friends, but it was sort of such a mix of emotions. One of my friends dropped a lit cigarette down the back of my t-shirt when the third goal went in, accidentally. So I'm in agony brief, ecstasy, then agony. And then another one of my friends who'd bought almost like a bucket of Sprite at half time, he threw that, and that doused the cigarette on my t-shirt. So like the full gambit of emotion. And that's even before Leicester come back and score 3 goals. And then, at that point, looking around the Swindon end, and everyone's just devastated. It looks like sort of the beach landing scene from Saving Private Ryan, just bodies on the floor, just devastation. And then luckily, thankfully, Steve White got taken out with the clearest penalty you've ever seen in your life. The goalkeeper, Kevin Paul, comes out, takes down Steve White. And Paul Bodin, who Wales fans, of course, will know as, the penalty expert, slammed it in the corner, and Swindon are promoted. And that was, honestly, I think that was the best day of my life. Then it was back down in the coach, back down to Swindon. All the locals who hadn't been to the game, we'd watched it on TV, out there on the motorway bridges, and then just a huge party in town. Like, it felt like the whole of Swindon was out. It's probably the closest Swindon has ever been to like the Rio Carnival. It was wild. And when you're 18, you just think, wow, this is amazing. And yeah, I don't, certainly it's my greatest football memory by a mile.
Well, it's a nice thing to have. So, Swindon coaches going around the magic roundabout, reliving their Rio Carnival experience.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. But then, we talked about Glenn Hoddle. He'd taken you up both on the field and off the field, but then decided the lure of Stamford Bridge was too much. And now we do have to veer into Swindon's Premier League experience, which, let's face it, lasted one season, but what a season.
There were some high points. And we finished bottom. We let in 100 goals. My main interest in this season is to see whether Sheffield United can match that. They're on course. They need to let in. I think I worked out they need to let in an average of 2.3 goals per game, which is very achievable.
Yeah, they're definitely on par at the moment. And having watched them quite a few times, I think you might lose that record, which is, it's an unwanted record. It'd be very nice to pass it on to Bramall Lane.
But also Swindon this season on track to concede 100 goals in all competitions, which, I mean, fair enough doing it in the Premier League when you're playing, Man United and Newcastle and Liverpool, fine. But, when you're playing Accrington and all disrespect to Accrington and, it's not quite as glamorous. But that season, there were high points. We got 30 points as well, which I know is a 42 game season, but there were a few wins. Well, I say few, literally 4, I think. And it took them 16 games to win their first match, which is a 1-0 win against QPR. In fact, they did the double over QPR that season.
Yeah.
But yeah. And they, beat Spurs at home, and who else? Southampton. I think that was literally it. But there were some great days. A 2-2 draw at Anfield, a 2-2 draw against Manchester United at home, which was just an amazing atmosphere as well. A packed stadium, and Eric Cantona getting sent off, and Mark Hughes having a run-in with a local fan at one point. I don't know if you remember that. If you look back on in the archives, he runs into the crowd at one point, and a guy who, at least in my memory, he was someone who looked like a massive farmhand, just kind of leant forward and gave an open-handed slap to Mark Hughes' face, which obviously I don't condone,
No, no, no,
but when you're 18, it's the funniest thing you've seen in your life.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, and Mark Hughes, he looked just genuinely shocked, and he walked away. And I think Roy Keane and Paul Ince wander over to have a word with the crowd, and then see the size of
Hmm.
the guy who slapped him, and then just sort of back away slightly. And yeah,
Yeah,
obviously, if that kind of thing now, if I saw that now, I'd be appalled, and I'd write 4 cartoons about it, and whichever fans
yeah,
did it, I would, lambast them. But at the same time, it was pretty funny in 1994.
yeah. And I suppose the one thing, the perfect epitaph for me about that Swindon season was they were going into the last game. They conceded 95 goals, and you just thought,
Mm.
"Come on, guys, we can. We're not going to go into three figures. We are going to be fine." And I think there wasn't long to go. 4-0 down at home to Leeds. Chris
Yeah,
Fairclough, who I doubt scored that many goals, put the fifth in, 100 on the mark. That that for me was, I mean, we talk about tragic comedy. That's
yeah,
pretty much it. And you know, we'll never forget Swindon. We'll never forget
no,
Swindon for that season. And again, you know, you've got a couple of unique things in your trophy cabinet. That's another one. You know, the playoff final, winning it, not going up, conceding 100 goals. But as you say, you might have that taken away with you by the um, pretty appalling Sheffield United side. A couple of other things, because this has been such a nice toing and froing through the Swindon history. One thing I wanted to raise with you, which is going back to that Tranmere game, we always have to go back to the original game, is something about the ground and the Rolex clock,
oh yeah.
which is something that I went to the county ground a couple of times, I think, in the past, but I do not remember this. So talk us through the Rolex clock.
The Rolex clock is an institution. In fact, it's funny you mention it because recently it was looking very sad. I don't know if some players had been practicing their free kicks or something, but it was just covered in mud and looked like bird shit. It was just in a horrible state and really showed like a perfect visual representation of the current state of Swindon Town. And yeah, a local firm offered their services and came and gave it a nice power hose. So it's looking spruce again now. But yeah, it's almost like yeah, it's a Rolex clock. I don't know how long it's been there, but yeah, generations. And I think when the current owner came in, who isn't the most popular at the moment, I have to say, Clem Morfuni, an Australian, he one of the first things he mentioned that he was in a sort of talking to some fans and he was like, "Oh, we've got to get rid of the clock." And everyone, like the absolute worst thing you could say was like, "You can't get rid of the clock. The clock." So I think it's there to stay. The floodlights are listed, buildings. So those 4 kind of big Subbuteo pylons we've got in each corner will always be there. Don't know about the clock. What do you think about the clock? Do you like the clock? You've got to say you like the
I,
clock.
I love the clock, and actually, there's a football ground guide, which I'm sure everyone's referred to in their time, and this is the claim. Another unique thing about Swindon Town is it's the only Rolex clock found in a football stadium anywhere in the world. Okay,
Oh,
that is. I mean, you could check in Australia if there are any, but that is the only Rolex clock in a football stadium in the whole world. I mean, it keeps coming. Swindon is the gift
yeah,
that
yeah.
keeps giving. So, that's a fantastic part of it. Again, I'm going back to March the 3rd against Tranmere Rovers. And as I say, I've managed to locate this,
Oh, look at that.
which is
Fantastic.
the programme from that
Lovely.
day. Yeah, it is lovely. There's a couple of lovely things. I mean, it's obviously quite small,
Ben.
20p. good value. But there's a couple of things in here which really hit me. This is the one that really hit me. I mean, the state of the photographs, I mean, they're a bit grainy. You can't really tell what's going on. But there's a lot of stuff in here. Ken Beamish, the manager, and also the chairman, go on about the fact that you won an Associate Members' Cup game at Oxford United, and you won 3-1 at the Manor Ground. And the pride in the Associate Members' Cup is absolutely fantastic. You've got another thing here, Arkle's Brewery, and I think you named a stand. It may still be called Arkle's Brewery. Brilliant traditional Wiltshire beer. Are they still going?
They are, yeah. You get a nice pint of 2B. Nice pint of, yeah, very good.
But the thing, and this is related to you, the thing that, again, is really beautiful is this, which is actually a cartoon. At the bottom of the page, underneath a crossword, okay? And the cartoonist, his name is Les Large, which is a pretty good name for cartoons. I'm just wondering whether this spawned your career, whether you looked at that cartoon in the Swindon programme as a 9-10-year-old and thought, that is it. That is where I'm heading.
Let's, for the purposes of the podcast, say yes, that's it.
Good.
I was kind of drifting in life, didn't know what I wanted to be. And I saw that and I thought, I want to be the guy who writes the crosswords. But if I can't do that, then I'll be a cartoonist. And yeah.
I knew that was going to fit.
What did the caption say on the cartoon? I couldn't quite see.
It said, it was the player is sort of with the referee, and he is so many pages I can't find it. It's just so the referee is sort of shouting at him, and the player is writing something on a notepad. Don't know where he got his notepad. And there are the two spectators who've both got hats on in the background, and the caption is, "He might not score many goals, but he's different."
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, for comedy purposes.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a reference to something that was going on in popular culture in March 1984.
Could have been.
I look back at some of my old cartoons and I'm absolutely baffled by what the hell I was on about. And some of these are only like 3 months old. What was that about? So, yeah, I can't imagine mine will date much better. So, yeah, it may perhaps, like I say, maybe that was the equivalent of a meme in '84. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Have you ever done a cartoon? Have you ever done a cartoon for the Swindon programme?
Not for the Swindon programme, no. I think I did some for a couple of Swindon fanzines. It was the first time I had anything in print. Was the Swindon fanzine, the 69er, named after the 1969 League Cup final victory, the 69er. And but no, nothing for the programme. I have done artwork for Swindon over the years. Like very early in my career. So I did a huge poster of all of our strips through history, or for as many as I could find in the pre-internet days, and they were going to sell that as a poster, but in the end they used it on the first time they had like a credit card style season ticket. And they shrunk down this A0 size, sort of almost billboard size thing into a credit card size. So you couldn't see any of the artwork. It was a bizarre decision. So there was that. When when Steve McMahon was manager, and I was just fresh out of university, and I'd done illustration at university and sort of trying to embark upon a career doing that. And this is, again, a pre-internet day, so you just had to sort of traipse around with your portfolio and show people. And I'd moved back to Swindon after uni, just mostly because I didn't know what to do. And I thought, I'll approach the club and see if I can do something for them. And I met the head of marketing, and he said, "Oh, why don't you do like a caricature of Steve McMahon, and we can sell it in the club shop. And so I went away and I did that, and I did this painting of Steve McMahon looking like sort of Don Corleone, and I think I had the Godfather, but sorry, I had the caption was the Gaffer, but in sort of Godfather sort of font text kind of thing. And I took it back and thought, they're going to be happy with this. And the marketing guy was pleased with it. And I didn't get paid for a while, and I didn't see it in the club shop either. And I thought, maybe they got a few printing issues. And eventually plucked up the courage to call them up and say, when am I getting paid? And the marketing guy said, well, why don't you come in and we'll talk about it? Which I immediately took as, oh, brilliant. They're going to, give me my money I'm going to get a cash payment, probably a firm handshake and a slap on the back and well done.
Yeah.
But I go in and see him and he says, look, we're not going to use it. There's just a slight issue. Like Steve McMahon isn't, he's not really, he's raised a few issues with it. So we're not going to use it. And at exactly that point, who should walk into the office? Steve McMahon. Now, I was pretty starstruck at that point because we'd just got promoted under him in '96. We'd won the third division, Division 2, third tier. And, he was still beloved by Swindon fans at that point. He walks into the office. The marketing guy says, "Oh, Steve, this is David. He's the guy who did that, the painting of you." And I've never felt a room shrink so much. And before I knew it, McMahon was in my face, calling me the C word. And I couldn't tell whether it's like hard to read whether he was joking or not. And he called me the C word, and then he followed it up with, "You made me look like Paul Daniels," which luckily there is a bit of a resemblance, like the slight comb over and the
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to make the similarity between Paul Daniels and Don Corleone, but anyway,
no.
Steve McMahon.
Well, it's a Venn diagram with Steve McMahon in the middle, Don Corleone on one side, and
of course,
Paul Daniels on the other. So yeah, in that moment of tension, luckily that made the marketing manager laugh, which I think diffused the situation. But yeah, I thought for a moment I was going to get beaten up by Steve McMahon. And that's one of the few occasions where someone I've come into sort of direct contact with them and it hasn't gone well. So most people take it pretty well. And, there's very rarely any malice in the people I draw. It's only, if I'm drawing Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson, then sure, I'll go in like Steve McMahon, studs up, try to cause maximum damage. But otherwise I'm not, looking into to ruin anyone's day. So yeah,
you know what they say: don't meet your cartoon heroes or someone
don't meet your aggressive former England midfielders in a enclosed space.
Another one of those great player managers at the county ground. Last thing, actually, I'm going to throw at you now, Dave, is I think for a lot of people when they go as a kid, one of the things that stands out is the mascot. Now, you have a little bit more interest in mascots than the general population. So, do you remember a mascot at the Swindon Tranmere game, or just the early games? Just generally rollicking around the ground and throwing sweets to kids or whatever it might be, or weeing in the sink. Do you remember the mascot? But then talk to us a little bit more about your personal involvement with Swindon's mascot.
So the Swindon mascot back in those days, I don't have memories of him being at that particular match, but the first iteration of a mascot at Swindon wasn't someone in like the nylon fluffy foam outfit. It was a bloke in a smock and a sort of straw hat and a rake, and he was a Swindon moonraker, but it's just a bloke who would walk around the pitch the sort of the tale of the Moonrakers in Wiltshire. Do you
I'm
know this?
afraid being a bit more of a London Surrey boy,
Okay, it's like
I missed out on that in my education.
it's a folklore tale of sorry, you can feel free to obviously cut all of this out because it's
No,
of
no, no.
limited interest.
This
But
is
yeah, the
gold.
Moonrakers were well, funny you mentioned gold because I think the tale goes that some smugglers in the West Country had a pot of gold or had some gold, and the tax men were coming for them, so they threw it in a lake. And when the tax guys turned up, um, the um, the smugglers got rakes and pretended that they were trying to rake the gold from the lake, but it was the reflection of the moon. And the tax men were like, "Oh, look at those Wurzels, those absolute idiots, thinking that the moon is gold," and they went off. And then obviously once they'd gone, they really did rake the gold from the lake where they'd hidden it. That's thus the
Okay, that
Moonrakers. That's the local legend, which is kind of like very much that sort of it resonates. I think that spirit of people from that part of the world that I recognise that underestimated, but always maybe got a bit of a better idea of what's going on than the people who are sort of sneering at them. I think we're not blessed. I mean, we've got a comedy accent for one, which I don't think helps. I don't have much of a West Country accent. I think my mum and dad are both from London, or all my family from London. But yeah, my sisters have got strong West Country accents, and yeah, I kind of missed it. Funny, I said to my wife recently that I said, "Oh, someone said to me that my West Country accent, the twang only comes out when I've been drinking, or if I'm shouting at the football." And she said, and she's not a football fan, and she said to me, "Why are you shouting at the football?" Which is, a reasonable question, but
yeah, it's
yeah,
exactly the same in the foster household. I actually ban anyone else apart from my son, who's a Palace fan, from coming. We have to lock the door if I'm watching it
yeah,
on
yeah.
television. No one's allowed to walk in because every time someone walks in, we concede a goal.
Oh yeah,
And also, my wife is Scottish, and exactly the same happens to her. She gets a couple of drinks, doesn't
yeah,
shout at the football, but it gets a little bit more Scottish the more
yeah, yeah,
drinks that go on.
yeah.
So I think that's really, and I quite like the fact that the mascot, the Moonraker, because when you said Moonraker, I was immediately thinking of the Bond film and
Yeah, yeah.
book, but that's not what it was. I like the fact it's also linked into financial irregularities. So maybe back in the
Yeah, that's
day, what
right.
they should have done
Yeah,
is, when the FA or Football League or whatever came looking, chuck it in a lake,
yeah,
hand a rake
that's
with a
right.
lake.
Aussie RD
But
Les pretending to rake the money from the boots of Colin Calderwood, and yeah. But you were asking me about the mascots, and so
yeah,
yeah, on that first game, it might have been the Moonraker, but probably no one. But eventually, it became Rocking Robin, who yeah, a foam costume of Robin. And when I briefly worked at the county ground, worked at Swindon for a year around the time of the Steve McMahon incident, worked in the ticket office, and they knew that, I was, a budding artist, and they asked me to design Rockin' Robin, the rebranded Rockin' Robin, and that was in 1997, and it's still going now. I think it might have a couple of years ago it was looking as sad as the Rolex clock, but I think it's been, spruced up a bit. But essentially, it's still the same design as back then, which I can't say I particularly like mascots, and at the time it felt like now I find them amusing, and they are a convenient comedic device for the cartoons. If I'm trying to represent something about a club, then it's great to have like Fred the Red or the Watford one.
or
The
Harry the Hornet.
recognizable
Yeah,
one. Yeah, the recognizable ones are really good fun to play with in the cartoons. But yeah, at the time in the like late '90s, I was kind of conflicted by it because I was thinking, oh, even back then, I was worried about the increased commercialization of football, and I thought, oh, this is the representation of everything. That like these cynical things trying to entertain children, they should be banned. But then, as soon as I was offered, 25 quid to design one, I was like, oh yeah, okay, well, they're just a bit of fun. They're not hurting anyone. But then, even now when I go back and Rockin' Robin is sort of dancing around in the centre circle and looking a bit of a dick. Occasionally my friends will sort of nudge me and say, he's fun, isn't he, Dave? And it's like, yeah, I'm responsible forever.
So you designed Rockin' Robin, and is he pretty much the same today as he was back then?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, not much has changed. I think they might have redone the costume, but it's like to the same design. Um, yeah, he was looking a bit frayed around the edges a few years ago. So they either cleaned him or gave him a new sort of a new felt coat, and yeah, he's looking a bit better now.
Good.
But then I when I moved to London to pursue the illustration career because I realised eventually that's where the whole media is. So I moved to London and got a job working in the ticket office at West Ham. And again, the same thing happened there. After a few months, they asked me to redesign their mascot, and it was Herbie the Hammer. And in the drawing that I did of him, I had Herbie heading a football. And then when it went off to the manufacturers, they took the design too literally, and they set his pupils permanently looking up as if he was heading the ball. So then for a few years, if you look up a picture of Herbie the Hammer, you'll see he's permanently kind of looking up, almost whimsical. Um, so yeah, that's really my contribution to the football industry and football history. Like no one's going to remember the cartoon stuff. It's going to be Rockin' Robin and a very weird looking Herbie the Hammer.
Well, if you're going to have something to remember you by, I think that's almost perfect, isn't it?
Legacy.
Legacy. That's it. Lasting legacy.
Yeah.
It'll be going on. Um, Brilliant. I think we've covered a fair amount of ground there. We have been to not only financial irregularities, we've taken in the Rolex clock, we've done the playoff final that is unique, we've done the 100 goals that is unique. Um, One final question, and I'm throwing this at you because I've got the chance to. When you went to that first game, the first few games, do you seriously? I know it wasn't the cartoon in the program, but was there something about that experience where it's sort of because obviously you're an illustrator? Is there something that you think just went into your head? Went, wow, actually, there's something I need to capture here in a way.
I'd love to say yes.
Good.
Uh, I don't think I was back then. Like I'd always draw everything. That was the main thing. So at Christmas, I'd get my Christmas presents, and rather than play with them, I'd sit and draw them. So I suspect that. Um, well, I do remember around that time when I first got into football. It was remember I said earlier that I had no interest in '82 at the World Cup, and by '83 I was obsessed. And a lot of that was to do with the look of the game. So it was collecting Panini stickers. It was the kits, the badges, and I
Yeah.
would fill notebooks and notebooks like my dad used to bring home from work. Well, bring home, steal from work. Those kind of black and red um, hardback books that
Yeah,
usually used
the little
for
A5 ones generally.
yeah, usually used for accountants and that sort of thing. I think these were A4 ones, and I would just
Okay.
fill them with illustrations and cartoons about football. I sort of would be characters, inventing characters, and I would just draw football strips endlessly to the point where I do recall mum and dad having not quite an intervention, but telling me, and I'm sure that lots of listeners and football fans had the same thing, where their parents become worried that you're only obsessing on on one thing, which was football. That's
Yeah.
all I've ever been, and really, I consider myself a football fan primarily. Like my whole life has pretty much been organized around how do I watch football? Every World Cup, every major tournament, it's like, well, how do I get out of this social engagement and this work thing that I can watch, this dead rubber group phase game, you know, um,
Yeah.
it's a genuine point of worry. So now I've been able to sort of organize my life in a way that it's become my job, and I can legitimately say, now I have to watch this. But yeah, I think the visual element of football is really what sucked me in early
Mm.
on, because I suspect from looking back at the video of the Swindon Tranmere game, probably wasn't much then that would have sucked me in visually because it was pretty
Mm.
gloomy. Like if I'd looked to my right, I'd have seen a load of blokes smoking in the town end, which is a low roofed, like dark building. It
Yeah.
still is. You can't even really see people's faces. And at the other end, you've got people shivering on the open bank of the Stratton Bank. Um, so yeah, I suspect even at that age, even though I was probably, you know, I've always lended towards the dark side of life, I suppose. But even then, probably, drawing gloomy men stood on a windswept bank might not have been sort of within my sort of wheelhouse at that age. But yeah, definitely the visual side of football is always interesting.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. And it's, as I say, it's been a fantastic journey going through Swindon's glorious history, back and forth. And I think the fact that, as Swindon ended up that season in, 1984, they ended up as in 18th, as you say, it was the lowest position Swindon had ever been in the Football League. And you look at the table today, 40 years later, where are they? They're 18th, and
Yeah.
Tranmere are pretty much where they are. So the circular nature of football, I think, is always a good thing to look at. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, David. We have covered so much ground, and it all inspired by that March day playing Tranmere Rovers. So thank you very much for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure.